Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Do you think Washington is as bad as they looked last week against Montana? I don't, and neither does my guest today. With us today on our visitors edition of the show is Huskies radio play-by-play voice, Tony Castricone. First, my view from Section 17 to get us rolling. If you watched the Washington-Montana game last Saturday, you were probably as shocked as I was at the final outcome. It is mind-numbing to watch a team with Washington's talent lay an egg in their opener against a bowl subdivision school. It happens, though, and we know that all too well as Michigan fans. I agree with Jim Harbaugh and our guest today. I dismiss that opening game loss. We are in no position to take anyone lightly either. We pounded Minnesota in the opener last year and thought we were back. I'm not blowing smoke by saying the Huskies are a very scary and talented young team. This will be a ball game, and after last week, they are in desperation mode. By midnight Saturday, we'll have a good idea if we are ascending, as Jim says, or if we are still a work in progress. My guest today says he cannot imagine the Huskies turning in another performance like the Montana game, and neither can I. Up next on our Visitors Edition is the radio play-by-play voice of Huskies football, Tony Castricone, here on The Michigan Man, so stay with us. Here with us on our visitors segment today is Washington Huskies radio play-by-play voice, Tony Castricone. Tony, great to have you with us.
Hey, thanks, Mike, for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, you know, Tony, the Huskies, as we all know by now, dropped their opener to Montana 13-7 at home, and I was shocked as I was watching the game. I just kept asking myself, hey, how can this happen? But Michigan fans can relate to a crushing opening season loss like that with the App State being fresh in our minds. There's no way to explain it, is there?
Yeah, well, I don't know that there's no way to explain it. I think there actually are a few explanations. And, I think let's just start with this. Mm-hmm. Montana, much like Appalachian State, is a good team. And, you gotta bring your A game every day, or else you lose. Mm-hmm. And I know that a lot of people, and fans certainly don't want to hear that as a reality, but it is true. Like if you don't play your best on any given day, you absolutely can lose. There's far too much talent out there in college football. There's more talent now in 2021 than there was in 2007 when App State did it to Michigan. And these FCS teams are loaded with major conference transfers. Nebraska, Arizona, Oregon State, just Michigan State, tons of them, right? And, and then if they're veteran and they're hanging around and doing a good job, then it just comes down to the fourth quarter. And that's the concerning thing, is not so much, you think back to that Michigan game, or you think to some of the other times that a FCS team has knocked off an FBS ranked power. Normally as a shootout, there's a star quarterback who just made some crazy plays that's probably going to go to the NFL, something like that. What's really weird about this game was it was the opposite. It was this low-scoring affair where Montana kept going 3 and out, but just kept punting the ball, not turning it over, hanging around in field position, and Washington couldn't move the football. And after a 9-play, 78-yard drive to open things up, just could not string first downs together. And there may be a couple reasons for that. One legitimate reason for that is Washington wasn't down its top wide receiver. They were down their top 4 wide receivers, which is just extremely rare and kind of hard to believe that was the situation that kind of unfolded. But one thing that's hard to comprehend is that Washington was actually getting beat at the line of scrimmage with an offensive line that is ranked 3rd in the country according to Phil Steele, 5th in the country according to Pro Football Focus, a veteran offensive line, one of the biggest offensive lines in Washington history, that just was allowing TFLs and allowing the quarterback to be under duress. And so that one's hard to really fathom. And that's why I know this staff is going back to the drawing board, because, obviously if they thought Montana was tough up front, Michigan has, bigger guys, faster guys, stronger guys, and, and more talent. And you guys know who they are in Hutchinson and, all the other guys that can get after the quarterback on that defense. So, yeah, I think that's really the concerning thing, was that Washington didn't play nearly as well in the trenches against an FCS team as they would have hoped.
Well, I know Dylan Morris had a tough night. He threw 3 picks, but as you mentioned, he wasn't alone. The offense never found a rhythm, and that was what was shocking to me, because the Huskies' offensive line is, as you said, is just absolutely huge, and they're considered the best unit, at least going into the season, in the Pac-12, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, and so I think, a couple things there. There was an interesting battle at left guard. MJ Ale, who was the Goliath up front at 365 pounds at left guard, he actually did not win back his starting spot during camp. Julius Bulow beat him out at left guard, so he did have a first-time starter there, but that was presumably an earned spot. And then in the middle of the game, Henry Bainivalu, the starting right guard, went down, and he was backed up by Nate Kalepo at right guard. So, a couple of the starters from last year didn't have a ton of reps in that game, but hey, regardless, you still expect the depth of the offensive line to be able to handle an FCS opponent, and it didn't. And so that's what's concerning. But, I don't know that it's just really hard to know, and really God only knows if that's an aberration, what happened on Saturday at Husky Stadium, or if that's a canary in the coal mine of things to come. I would tend to think it's a bit of an aberration, because this is a line that did move the ball against Utah last year, which always has a good defense, Stanford last year. So, I mean, it's really hard to know, but certainly some things to be cleaned up in advance of a huge game for week 2.
Well, as you mentioned, it surely did not help the top 3 Huskies receivers were on the sidelines, and then Jalen Polk went down with a chest injury. That's what I've read, that's how it was classified, as a chest injury. The Huskies, because of that, are very thin in the receiver room, aren't they?
Yeah, really are. And, I think one of the few guys they have healthy is the Michigan transfer, Giles Jackson, which your fan base is, really familiar with. And he probably will see a lot of reps on Saturday at Michigan Stadium, which would be certainly a storyline to follow throughout the game. But, beyond that, a couple of guys that were in the top 3 Terrell Bynum, Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, they were widely considered the top three going into the fall. Head coach Jimmy Lake said they're all going to be week to week. They're nicked up. They're going to be week to week. And so that leaves it a little uncertain as to whether or not they'll play this weekend. So there's a chance they could get some of that talent in the wide receiver room back this week against Michigan, but we really just won't know until they start doing warm-ups on Saturday.
Well, over on the defensive side, the Huskies are led by first-year coordinator Bob Gregory. He moved up from the linebacker coach position. A lot of talent and experience on the D, and they only gave up 13 points to Montana. As you said, it was 3 and out for Montana continuously. So did you see positives in the performance of the defense on Saturday?
I did, and I think, the defense certainly, they gave up the 10 points in the fourth quarter that allowed Montana to take the lead and ultimately win, but it's hard to lay that loss at the feet of the defense, giving up just 13 points, only giving up a handful of first downs in the whole game. And I feel like had the Huskies been able to even just string more first downs together, get themselves into field goal range and hit a few chip shots, that Washington's defense wouldn't have been on the field so much, asked time and time again to make these stops. And maybe, if Washington converts a couple of field goals in the first half and they've got the game at arm's length a little bit and they're able to just string some more first downs together, maybe they win that game 16-3. And it's not pretty, but they're still ranked heading into this enormous week 2 showdown at Michigan. And so the defense is legit. I mean, you're going to see probably your best pair of corners together in the country coming up on Saturday in Kyler Gordon and Trent McDuffie. Trent McDuffie, a preseason All-American. Kyler Gordon, who has been he's a freak athlete. He wears number 2. He might remind you of a great number 2 that you had. And, he's a guy that's just super athletic. You're not going to see him on special teams, but you probably could, because he's just so good with the ball in his hands and a real game breaker at the cornerback position. And then I think at inside linebacker, Pro Football Focus ranked Edifwani Lafosio, number 48, the top returning inside linebacker in the country. And so you've got those guys anchoring the defense. It was a good battle at safety. The safety position's very deep. You've got 3 guys with starting experience who are now backing up the guys that won the battle in camp, Julius Ervin and Cam Vicky-Landon. Really where I'm curious to see this Husky defense show up is in 2 areas. A, can they stop the run? And Michigan has a deep talent at the running back room, not just with Hassan Haskins, who started last week, of course, but Blake Corum did great, spelling Haskins. And I'm curious to see, can the Huskies stop the run? They've experimented with this new defensive coordinator, going to some 52 looks. They've always been a nickel-based defense, but they're trying to beef up a little bit inside with a little more 52. And you've got 3 veteran big linemen on the defensive line in Tui Tele. He's number 99. Tuli Nasanoa is number 91. He's a big-time recruit, and so is Taki Taimani, number 94. All 3 of those guys are studs on the inside of the defensive line. But can they stop the run, and can they get pressure after the quarterback? Our All-American Zion Tupuola-Fatui, who led the nation in sacks last year, injured his Achilles in the spring. He will not play this weekend. And so you've got a veteran with 14 career sacks and Ryan Bowman coming off of one edge, but who's going to really help get pressure on the quarterback coming off the other? You've got a trio of young guys who are talented but all very young. And I think that's going to be the 2 big storylines for the Husky defense. Can they stop the run of Michigan, and can they get some pressure on whoever the quarterback's going to be, McNamara or McCarthy?
Well, it's a very interesting team when you look at on paper. I think it was 58% of the point production back on the offensive side. So a lot of returning starters too, but overall this team is still very young, isn't it?
Some of that has to do with the COVID eligibility freezing in 2020. And so what you've got is 86% of the players on this roster technically qualify as underclassmen, either freshmen or sophomores eligibility-wise. Got 120-some players on the team. You only got 6 seniors and 11 juniors. And so, we've got 20 players who are third-year freshmen, and they're not insignificant players. We're talking about your starting quarterback, Dylan Morris. We're talking about, one of your two main running backs. We're talking about starting wide receivers and all sorts of stuff. Like, I mean, guys on the defensive line, defensive backs, a lot of third-year freshmen on this team. And so part of the reason there's a lot of expectations is because some of these guys not only have been around for a while, but they're also going to continue to be eligible to be around if they stay here in college and exhaust their eligibility. And they're very talented. And the Huskies have some good transfers coming in as well. You've got Buki Radley-Hiles, who was a five-star recruit. He's the nickel back, a transfer from Oklahoma. You've got coming off one edge, Jeremiah Martin, a Texas A&M transfer. And so, this is a young team that has a lot of talent and was picked very high in the Pac-12. Now, everybody's thoughts about those preseason predictions have gone out the window after what happened this past weekend. And all the focus is squarely on, can we rebound with a big win at Michigan to make you feel like all those hopes and dreams you have for this season are still very attainable?
And that's it. This Saturday, the Huskies, of course, travel to the Big House. It's a big coast-to-coast national game Saturday night. It's imperative for them that they shake off that Montana game and come ready. And I know that's easier said than done, though, isn't it?
Well, I don't know if it's easier said than done. I mean, I think this is a team led by a really good head coach in Jimmy Lake, a young head coach who's still trying to prove himself. That game on Saturday was just the fifth game of his career. But he's a Chris Peterson disciple. He was on the staff of Chris Peterson the entire run here at Washington. He's loved by his players. And he's just a guy that is no nonsense, but at the same time really has a lot of swagger, brings a lot of energy and a lot of fun to this program. And the players absolutely love him. And he's a no excuses kind of guy, took complete ownership at the podium of the Monday press conference, absolutely said that Saturday's loss was unacceptable. But, I think still they gotta shake off Saturday and just get ready for this weekend and understand that, if there was anybody on the field on Saturday that was taking Montana for granted, that's never going to happen again the rest of the season. And now now we'll see if Michigan takes Washington for granted. I don't think that they will, but this is a talented Washington team that is capable of winning any game that they're in. And I truly mean that. Like, I don't know that they're going to win all their games the rest of the year, but I'll tell you, heading into this camp, I think a lot of people here in Seattle felt like they'd be favored in Ann Arbor, and now they're not based on what happened Saturday. But the role players and the pieces still remain the same, and so I think Washington has a lot of potential, but certainly that potential has not manifested yet this season. And we'll see whether or not it's able to on Saturday night in what's sure to be a hostile environment. Just the 10th ever night game at Michigan Stadium and the maze out and the 109,000. I mean, gosh, we play in front of 70,000 and we love that. We feel like it's amazing. But to go more than 50% bigger than that, it's almost hard to fathom. And so truly, we call our home setting the greatest setting in college football. But we'll be going into the biggest setting in college football on Saturday, and it'll be hostile for sure.
Well, most of the Michigan beat writers said before this season the Washington game would be the litmus test for Michigan. We'd know a lot more about this team after the game. And now, after Montana, I suppose Huskies fans can say the same thing about their team, Tony.
Yeah, no question. And I think as you look ahead past Michigan and into the rest of the Pac-12 schedule, part of the reason there's high expectations is because the schedule lines up pretty nicely. The teams that have generally given Washington a hard time in conference play, almost all those teams appear at home. And so you've got a big back-to-back stretch at the end of October, early November, where you're at Stanford and home against Oregon. But, there was some sentiment here in Seattle that you're basically playing for the North Division early in November with the potential of going into those games unbeaten. Now, that's not going to be the case now, but if they can right the ship with a win against Michigan, there's a ton on the line is what I'm trying to say this weekend for this Washington team. There's an absolute ton on the line. And even, just thinking about how disappointing this loss to Montana is, a lot of people around here have been talking about that 2007 Michigan team. And as you'll remember, it wasn't just the loss to Appalachian State, but it was kind of an ugly week 2 loss to Oregon.
Oh, yeah.
But after that was done, after you got past 0-2, you put together 8 wins in a row, and you're still playing your arch rival at the end of the year for a chance to go to the Rose Bowl. And so that wasn't a total catastrophe of a season. Quite the contrary, you won 9 games and you beat number 9 Florida in the Capital One Bowl. And
Exactly.
so Washington still has a lot of potential ahead of it, but it's got to get a lot of things straightened out going into this week.
Final question before we let you get away then, Tony. The Saturday night games on the national stage are always a big deal, a lot of fun. It's Washington versus Michigan. To me, that's all you have to say. And you've covered the Huskies. You've been behind the microphone for how long now?
This is my 4th year. The first thing I did when I got in here was, just try to familiarize myself with the tradition. And it's really funny. So much of the tradition has to do with some of these epic games against Michigan.
Oh, yes.
And Rose Bowl matchups, the go back years. And of course, Washington and the national championship team in 1991 beat Michigan in the Rose Bowl in order to do that. A bitter loss in Ann Arbor the last time these two teams played in 2002. Washington had a great win the year before in Seattle in 2001. There was a great series back in the 80s when Jim Harbaugh was the quarterback at Michigan between these two. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of great tradition here. And just the fact that we're going to run this thing back and reacquaint and reunite. I got to tell you, one of the grave disappointments of the COVID year of 2020 was us losing out on a home game.
Oh, yeah.
Against you guys to open up the season last year. And we're glad that the two administrations were able to get it back on the docket for 2028. And we'll be waiting with bated breath to host you guys over the next 7 years. But yeah, this would be truly a pleasurable trip to go to one of the great stadiums in college football and just enjoy an intersectional battle. It should be a lot of fun.
Well, I think there is a very good chance. I've been around this long enough to know that Montana was ugly, but this Washington team is far too talented. Coach Lake's going to get them straightened around. I think we're going to be in for quite the game Saturday night in the Big House.
I hope so. I think there's a lot of potential for a really great college football game. So let's hope so.
Here with us on our Visitors Edition today has been Washington Huskies radio play-by-play voice Tony Castricone. Tony, thanks for being so generous with your time, and enjoy your weekend in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
On Quick Hits today, as we've become accustomed to during the season, not much injury news shared with us by the staff. We know about Ronnie Bell and that Zach Zinter has a broken hand, but he should still play this week. Here are a few game day notes of interest. We hold an edge in this series with 7 wins against 5 losses. The first meeting with the Huskies was on September 26, 1963 in Ann Arbor, a 50-0 win for us. The last meeting was a barn burner on August 31st of 2002, also here in the Big House, a 31-29 win again for us. Head coach Jimmy Lake is in his second year. His record is 3-2. They were 3-1 in last year's very strange season. They returned 16 starters, 7 each on offense and defense, as well as 2 special teams players. Their last bowl appearance was at the Mitsubishi Motors Bowl in Las Vegas in 2019, where they pounded Boise State 38-7. They enter this week's game unranked after last Saturday's debacle. As I said at the top of the show, dismiss last week's loss to Montana. Unless this team has completely gone off the tracks, which would be shocking, they are a formidable and talented group expected to make a run for the Pac-12 title. Beating these guys would be a huge accomplishment for us. Saturday's game gets underway shortly after 8 p.m. The weatherman says temps will hover near 70 degrees the entire game. It will be dry, and there will be winds gusting from 10 to 20 miles per hour, subject to change in southeastern Michigan, as we all know too well. Next week, we are at home again to take on Northern Illinois. On Tuesday's Michigan Game Day show, we will have Chris Ballas from the Wolverine.com join us. Then on Thursday's Visitors Edition, the radio play-by-play voice of Northern Illinois football, Bill Baker. And this is his 41st year in the booth calling the action. So hopefully we are 2-0 to begin the week. The Washington game is going to be tough. It's time for us, though, to step up in a big game on the national scene and take another step in the right direction. We shall see, though. Enjoy the game, everyone. That does it for this week. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine weekend. Think victory? Beat Washington. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue.
Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!